The crimson and cobalt emergency lights painted surreal, shifting patterns across the damp asphalt of my driveway, their rhythmic pulses cutting through the tranquil evening like a discordant alarm. Two squad cars, their engines rumbling to a hushed idle, came to a definitive stop at the curb in front of my home, a place that had always been a sanctuary. From the living room window, the scene unfolded with the slow-motion dread of a bad dream. There stood my 16-year-old daughter, Emily, utterly frozen on the welcome mat of our front porch, her overnight duffel bag and backpack still clutched in her trembling hands, her face a pale mask of shock and fear. Two uniformed officers were advancing up the walkway with the deliberate, cautious steps of their profession, their palms resting lightly on their duty belts, a universal posture of readiness for the unknown, and there, positioned like a grim sentinel at the precise edge of my meticulously maintained property line, stood Patricia Hawthorne. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, a gesture of self-righteous vindication, and her face was fixed with that infuriatingly smug, self-satisfied grin I had come to know all too well. She was the self-proclaimed queen, the unelected monarch of Maple Ridge Estates, and she was currently surveying what she believed was her finest hour. What Patricia, in her blissful, power-drunk ignorance, failed to comprehend was that in her obsessive quest to police my property, she had just triggered the single most catastrophic miscalculation of her meddling, intrusive life. She had, with one phone call, declared war on a man who presided over conflicts for a living, and she was woefully unprepared for the consequences. To fully appreciate the poetic justice of the situation, you need some context. My name is David Garrison, and for the past 12 years, I have served as a circuit court judge here in Jefferson County. My days are spent in a world of procedure, evidence, and measured judgment, a world far removed from the petty tyrannies of suburban governance. After my divorce from Sarah 3 years ago, we established a smooth, amicable custody arrangement. Our daughter, Emily, began splitting her time evenly between my modern 2-story home in the Maple Ridge subdivision and her mother's charming older bungalow across town. It was a system that worked beautifully for everyone involved, fostering a sense of stability and dual belonging for Emily. It worked, that is, for everyone except our ever-watchful, perpetually vigilant HOA President Patricia Hawthorne, who seemed to regard every unfamiliar vehicle, every visiting relative, every deviation from the mundane as a personal affront and a potential security threat to her sacred, gated community. For 5 long years, Patricia had ruled over Maple Ridge Estates not as a manager of common interests, but as an absolute monarch presiding over her personal fiefdom. She had committed every single bylaw, every obscure amendment, to memory, and she enforced them all with the unyielding zeal of a religious fanatic, deriving visible, palpable joy from catching her fellow residents in even the most minuscule of violations. A trash can left visible at the curb past 6:01 p.m.? That was a $50 fine, delivered with a photocopied citation slipped into a plastic sleeve on your mailbox. A lawn measured to be a half-inch over the community-mandated height limit? Another citation, complete with a grainy, time-stamped photograph as evidence. She once levied a $200 fine against the Henderson family for the grave offense of leaving their festive Christmas lights illuminated until January 3rd, citing a prolonged seasonal display detrimental to community aesthetics. But of all her many fixations, her favorite, her true passion, was policing the human traffic that flowed in and out of our neighborhood. Patricia fancied herself a suburban security expert, a one-woman neighborhood watch. She could often be found lurking near the entrance gates, her sedan idling ominously as she interrogated pizza delivery drivers, tailed unfamiliar cars at a discreet distance, and even snapped long-lens photographs of visitors like some low-budget, overly enthusiastic private investigator. Most of us, for the sake of peace and quiet, had learned to ignore her antics, to pay the occasional absurd fine and mutter under our breaths, figuring that a direct confrontation with such a personality was a futile drain of energy. That collective tolerance, however, evaporated the moment she decided to set her sights on my daughter. The evening it all came to a head had begun like any other. Emily's mother had dropped her off at the main gate, as was their usual routine, and Emily had begun the short 2-block walk to my house, a path she had traversed dozens of times without incident. I was nestled in my home office, surrounded by the quiet hum of my computer and the dense, legalistic prose of Monday's upcoming case files, when a sharp, unfamiliar sound pierced the domestic calm. At first, I dismissed it as the boisterous play of the Thompson kids next door, but then I caught it, the distinct, unnerving crackle of police radio traffic. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I rose from my leather chair and rushed to the front door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The scene that greeted me was both surreal and infuriating. There was Emily, my bright, kind-hearted daughter, standing surrounded by the two officers on our own porch, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks as she tried, with a voice cracking with emotion, to explain to the stone-faced adults that she lived here, that her father was inside, that this was her home. But Patricia's shrill, self-righteous voice cut through my daughter's explanations like nails dragged across a chalkboard. "I saw her sneaking around the back of the property," Patricia announced to the officers, her hands waving in dramatic, sweeping gestures. She was clearly casing the place, looking for points of entry. "I have never seen this individual before in my life, and I make it my business to know every single resident in this community. She is obviously some troubled teen looking to break in while the owners are presumed gone." I observed her behavior. It was highly suspicious. The officers, a calm, experienced-looking woman and a younger, more rigid male partner, exchanged a brief, knowing glance. They were skeptical, but professionally obligated to proceed with caution. The taller one, whose nameplate read Chen, attempted to de-escalate. "Ma'am," she said gently, turning back to Emily, "she states that she lives here. She even has a key to the residence." Patricia let out a short, derisive scoff. "Of course she has a key. She probably stole it from a school bag or had a copy made somewhere. I've seen this exact scenario on the news. These young people case friendly-looking neighborhoods, wait for the perfect moment when no cars are in the driveway, and then they strike. I'm telling you, officers, I have prevented a burglary here today. You should be thanking me for my vigilance." That was the moment I stepped fully outside, allowing the screen door to swing shut behind me with a soft click that nonetheless drew every eye. "Is there a problem here, officers?" I asked, my voice deliberately level, the same tone I used to call my courtroom to order. Patricia's face lit up with a triumphant gleam, as if she had been waiting for a larger audience to appreciate her civic heroism. "Oh, Judge Garrison! Thank goodness you're home! You nearly had a very serious situation. I just apprehended this young girl trying to break into your house. Don't you worry. I called 911 the second I saw her suspicious activity." I walked down the porch steps slowly, deliberately, pulling my worn leather wallet from my back pocket. I kept my eyes locked on the officers. "That won't be necessary, officers," I stated calmly, handing them my driver's license and, more importantly, my laminated judicial ID. "This is my daughter, Emily Garrison. She is here for her court-ordered visitation weekend. She has every right to be on this property." Officer Chen took the proffered identification, and I saw her professional demeanor shift instantly, a flicker of recognition and then profound embarrassment in her eyes. Her partner, Officer Mitchell, took a half-step back, his posture relaxing as he, too, placed my face. They had both testified in my courtroom on multiple occasions. I had signed warrants and presided over motions in their department's cases. "Judge Garrison," Officer Chen said, her voice now formal and deeply respectful. "Our sincerest apologies for the confusion and the disturbance, sir. We received a report from this address of a possible break-in in progress." Just like that, the foundation of Patricia's confidently constructed reality began to fracture. "Wait, what? No, that can't be right," she sputtered, her head swiveling between me and the officers. "I've never seen this girl before. There must be some mistake." "She can't possibly be your daughter, Miss Hawthorne?" I interrupted, my voice now carrying the same resonant weight and authority it holds when I address counsel in my courtroom. "This is my daughter, Emily. She has been visiting this home, her home, every other weekend for the past 3 years. If you have never noticed her presence, that says considerably more about the selectivity of your attention span than it does about her legitimate right to be standing on her own front porch." Patricia's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "Well, how was I supposed to know?" She deflected, her voice rising in pitch. She was behaving very suspiciously, walking around toward the back of the house. The back? I asked, raising a single skeptical eyebrow. You mean the public sidewalk that leads to the concrete path to my front door? The one she uses because the side gate, in compliance with HOA safety regulations I might add, is kept locked. Is that the sneaking you witnessed? Emily, emboldened by my presence, finally found a steadier voice, though it still trembled with residual hurt and anger. I tried to tell her, Dad. The second she started yelling at me from across the street, I said I was your daughter and that I lived here. But she just yelled louder, told me to get off the property and that I was a liar. And then she called the cops on me. Officer Mitchell, who had been quietly jotting notes in a small pad, looked up, his pen poised. Miss Hawthorne, he asked, his tone neutral and investigative, did this young lady identify herself to you as the resident's daughter before you made the decision to call 911? Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times, soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air on a riverbank. Well, she might have said something, she finally stammered, waving a dismissive hand. But I didn't believe her. Anyone could just claim to be someone's daughter. I was just being cautious, exercising my duty as a concerned citizen. You can't be too careful these days. Not with all the crime you see on the news. Officer Chen's voice was calm, but it was now edged with a firm, professional steel. Actually, Miss Hawthorne, you can be too careful. Filing a false report to emergency services is a criminal offense in this state. You specifically called 911 to report a burglary in progress. You called 911 to report a felony in progress, I reiterated, my voice calm but cutting like a surgeon's scalpel, when what you actually witnessed was a minor child entering her legal father's home. With permission, with a key, with every legal and moral right to be there. It wasn't a false report, Patricia protested weakly, though the earlier unshakable bravado had completely drained from her tone, leaving behind only a defensive whine. I genuinely believed— You genuinely believed, I interrupted sharply, that your own brand of paranoid harassment could be mistaken for civic duty. Tell me, Miss Hawthorne, how many other residents' children, how many visiting grandparents, how many babysitters and dog walkers have you summoned the police on? How many innocent people just trying to go about their lives have you terrorized with your little vigilante performances? The two officers exchanged another uneasy, knowing glance. It was abundantly clear this was not their first encounter with Patricia's self-appointed crusades. Officer Mitchell flipped back a few pages in his notepad. Actually, Judge Garrison, he said, choosing his words with care, our patrol log shows we've responded to several calls from this complainant, Ms. Hawthorne, over the past 12 months. The majority, upon our arrival and investigation, turned out to be unfounded or false alarms. Delivery drivers, visiting family members, that sort of thing. Patricia's face twitched. I am just trying to keep this neighborhood safe, she insisted, but her voice faltered, and her arms, which had been crossed so defiantly, dropped limply to her sides, the picture of deflated authority. No, I corrected her, my voice cold and measured, the sound of final judgment. You are trying to control this neighborhood. There is a profound difference, and today you crossed a line that transcends HOA bylaws. You didn't just harass a visitor. You traumatized a minor child. My minor child. My daughter. Officer Chen stepped forward, her posture now fully that of a law enforcement officer delivering an official warning. Miss Hawthorne, I am issuing you a formal, documented warning for the misuse of emergency services. This incident, including your statement and the circumstances, will be filed in our department's records. If a pattern of such false or frivolous reports is established, you could very well face criminal charges. Patricia's complexion went from a flushed red to a sickly pale gray. You can't do that. I'm the HOA President. I have a responsibility, a fiduciary duty to this community. Your responsibility, I interrupted, my words dropping like stones, as outlined in the Maple Ridge Estate's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which I reviewed thoroughly before purchasing this property, is to manage the common areas, maintain the community fund, and enforce the actual written bylaws. Nowhere in that document, I can assure you, does it grant you the authority to play police officer, to harass residents, or to profile their guests. I then turned my attention fully to the officers. Officers, thank you for your professionalism. I will be filing formal complaints regarding this incident, not only with your department's Internal Affairs Division, but also with the full HOA board. This behavior is beyond a simple misunderstanding. It represents a pattern of harassment that needs to be addressed through the proper official channels. That is your right, Your Honor, Officer Chen replied, nodding respectfully. She then turned back to Patricia, her gaze unwavering. Ma'am, I strongly suggest you take the time to educate yourself on what constitutes a legitimate emergency. Wasting police resources and sending armed officers into a potentially volatile situation based on a groundless suspicion is not just foolish. It's a serious offense that endangers the public and my colleagues. As the two officers returned to their patrol cars, the strobing lights finally extinguishing with a sense of finality, Patricia stood utterly frozen, silhouetted against the dull glow of their taillights. A small crowd of neighbors, drawn by the spectacle of the police presence, had gathered on adjacent lawns and in doorways. Though they began to slowly disperse, I caught more than a few satisfied smirks, muttered approvals, and nods of solidarity. It seemed I was far from the only resident of Maple Ridge who had finally had their fill of Patricia Hawthorne's particular brand of tyranny. This isn't over, Patricia finally managed to sputter, finding a last reservoir of defiance as she took a step toward me, her finger jabbing the air. I will be addressing this misunderstanding at the next board meeting. Your daughter may be allowed to visit, but there are procedures in place for a reason. Guest registrations, proper notifications to the security committee. There are rules, Judge Garrison. Actually, I said, pulling my smartphone from my pocket, the screen glowing brightly in the deepening twilight. Let's discuss those rules right now. I believe I have board member Jennifer Rodriguez on speed dial. She's a real estate attorney, as you know. I'm absolutely certain she would be fascinated to hear a detailed account of how the HOA president called the police on a sitting judge's child, accusing her of burglary on her own father's property. Patricia's eyes went wide with panic as I deliberately scrolled through my contacts and tapped on Jennifer's name. That's not necessary, she stammered, her bravado evaporating into pure alarm. We can certainly handle this matter internally. There's no need to involve other board members in a private dispute. Oh, I think it is entirely necessary, I replied, holding the phone to my ear, the ringing audible in the quiet street. You see, Miss Hawthorne, you have been operating under a profound and dangerous illusion that your title grants you unlimited unilateral authority over your neighbors. But every system, no matter how small or seemingly insular, from a nation's government down to a homeowners association, is built upon checks and balances. It seems yours are long overdue. The following few weeks were a masterclass in suburban political fallout. True to my word, I filed detailed, formal complaints with both the police department's internal review board and the full 5-member HOA board of Maple Ridge Estates. The story, as these things do, spread through our community with the speed and intensity of a California wildfire. Patricia Hawthorne, the seemingly untouchable, omnipotent HOA president, had finally overreached in the most spectacular fashion possible. She had called 911 on Judge Garrison's daughter, the same woman who had spent years flaunting her minor influence, weaponizing bylaws, and lecturing her neighbors about compliance, had now managed to alienate and provoke one of the most respected and well-connected legal figures in the entire county. 2 weeks later, the board, under significant pressure, called an emergency meeting. The community clubhouse was packed to capacity. It was a scene I had never witnessed before. Every plastic chair was occupied, with residents lining the walls, leaning against the back, their murmurs creating a low, angry hum of anticipation. One by one, they stood to speak, and as they did, it became painfully and publicly clear that Patricia's reign of fear and pettiness had been building toward this inevitable, collective reckoning. Mr. Patterson, a sweet elderly widower, was the first to approach the microphone, his voice shaking with a mixture of nerves and long-suppressed anger. He recounted how Patricia had fined him $100 because his 10-year-old grandson's bicycle had been left unattended in his own driveway for exactly 10 minutes while the boy ran inside to use the bathroom. Then came the Sharp family, who shared the humiliating story of how Patricia had called the police on their annual family reunion, claiming the gathering of 20 people was an unauthorized commercial event that violated noise ordinances, despite it being a quiet Saturday afternoon. Even the normally timid Mrs. Foster, who rarely spoke to anyone, stood up, her hands trembling visibly as she clutched the podium, recounting how Patricia had harassed her for weeks over the non-conforming shade of purple in her new flower bed, threatening daily fines until she dug the plants up. Patricia sat at the long board table, her once imposing posture crumbling with every damning testimony. She seemed to shrink physically, becoming smaller, more fragile, her defiant chin dropping toward her chest. When the board chair finally called for a vote of no confidence, the result was not just expected. It was a unanimous, resounding repudiation. Not a single hand was raised in her defense, not even from her former allies on the board, who could no longer justify or tolerate the liability and the sheer embarrassment her actions had brought upon the entire community. But the fallout, beautifully, did not end there. After reviewing the official police report from the incident with my daughter and cross-referencing it with her history of frivolous 911 calls, the county prosecutor's office decided there was sufficient cause to press formal misdemeanor charges for the persistent misuse of emergency services. The irony was delicious and was lost on no one. The woman who could not stop calling the police was now being formally summoned by them, her name appearing on a docket instead of in her own complaint log. The morning of her arraignment, I happened to see her in the bustling main hallway of the courthouse. She looked like a hollow shell of the domineering woman she had once been. Her usually perfect helmet-like hair was slightly unkempt, her expensive suit was wrinkled, and that trademark smug, confident smile was gone, replaced by a pinched, anxious expression. Her attorney, a nervous young man in an ill-fitting suit who clearly regretted taking the case, was speaking to her in hushed, urgent tones. 50 hours of community service, I overheard him saying, and a $5,000 fine. It's a plea deal. You should take it. You'll also be barred from holding any position of leadership within the HOA for a period of 5 years. Patricia's face completely crumpled. $5,000? She whispered, the color draining from her face. 5 years in exile from the self-constructed kingdom she had ruled with an iron fist. Our eyes met for a brief electric moment as I passed by on my way to my chambers. I could have offered a cutting remark, a satisfying "I told you so," but I felt no need. The law, the very system I had dedicated my life to upholding, had already done what it was designed to do. It had provided a measured, proportional, and decisive response to a profound abuse of power. Justice doesn't always arrive with a dramatic, thunderous roar. Sometimes, most effectively, it simply appears, quiet, impartial, and final. That morning, in a near whisper, Patricia Hawthorne stood before a judge, a colleague of mine, from a different county to avoid any conflict, and pleaded no contest to the charges. Her voice was barely audible as she accepted the sentence. When the judge read the punishment aloud, the community service, the significant fine, and the 5-year leadership ban, her shoulders sank in a posture of utter and complete defeat. $5,000, 5 years of enforced silence from the neighborhood's political landscape. And as I drove home that evening, for the first time in a very long while, the streets of Maple Ridge Estates finally, truly felt peaceful again.